guess I'll answer questions if you have any. Take a sip of water.
Well, I don't know you very well, but some of the other people do. Where did you grow up, and what is
It
it?
takes place in Revere.
Revere.
Yeah, and the first part I was with my Italian-American family in East Boston, and it was a very different atmosphere there, very nurturing. It was a benevolent patriarchy, and matriarchy. Believe me, it was very powerful matriarchy and patriarchy. And you know, it was a lot of food, a lot of great times, and I felt very safe and loved. But you know, East Boston is not the answer to everyone's problems. If I had stayed there, it would have been pretty awful for me to go to high school in East Boston. I mean, when you read the book, there are scenes that take place in East Boston, and there's lots of hints of what would have happened, because the kids are very tough, and you know, there's no trees. It's a very, very different atmosphere, and yet Revere is almost kind of like the same thing with trees. And what we use our trees for now, and like wooded areas that you hear about on the news, things being found in wooded areas, you know, it's not a great thing. It's even more indicative of life now as well as back then, although now we can add drugs to the scene and guns and things like that. But there was a lot of violence and a lot of, yeah, there was fear, you know, but it was not kind of drug-related thing that we have now.
And there was the beach.
Yeah, the beach. Well, the beach was beautiful and scary. It was a city beach.
And what about the time frame did you grow up?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. I'm sorry. Gloria being around 12, that would have been the early 60s. So it starts at 51 when she's 3, well, 54 when she's 3, and goes to 73 when she graduates college. But it's not, I mean, it really takes off in a different direction from my life. I really wanted to write a novel rather than a memoir. I really wanted to work with the characters and symbolism and embellish here and take away there, and you know, write a different kind of story from what happened. I wanted something more dramatic. I felt there's so many things that happened to her that it started to sound a little comical, and I had to balance it with something dramatic, and I chose to use a murder. And of course, Gloria finds that violence is just not the answer. It's not the way to go, and she turns from her back on that and stumbles a little bit with the kind of boyfriend that most girls who are abused kind of wind up with a lot of the time, and then she wakes up from that too. So it's a very typical story in a way of abuse, and in another way it's much more heightened and dramatic.
I've started the story, but I haven't, you know, gotten too deep into it. How old was she when she moved, and what were the circumstances of the move to Revere?
It's very interesting. They were living, we were all living together in the same house, and close quarters, and very beautiful though. We're full, you know, gardening and just great food and times. And basically a space issue, and also my mother wanted to get out of the city. And Revere at the time was considered the country, you know, that, well, to the simple minds, it was considered the country. And the place where we moved to, and that's another great part of the book, which I love, is because it formed a valley between two highways, and it was very natural, thick trees, and you know, a lot of time spent in nature in a way. And it's so ironic being surrounded by the highways, and yet it wasn't safe. Yeah.
What was not safe about it?
Well, that green provides a lot of cover, and I had to walk by that on the way to school. Walking along the highway a lot of times, men would stop and open their car doors and ask if I wanted a ride. I was going to either school or church. You know, being surrounded by highways, I had to go this way to go to church, and this way to go to school, or that way to go to school. So I had to cross the highway and walk along the highway a lot. And you know, as an adult, I now know what that meant. As a kid, I was like, no, I just want to be alone, you know, I like walking alone. But thank goodness I did. You know, I was a shy kid, and I was not the kind of adventurous kid who would say, "Oh, great, a ride." You know, I mean, I could have been killed over 100 times that I can even think of off the top of my head. That was a daily occurrence from the time I was about 12, when I was walking by myself.
So that's the early 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, yes, the early 60s, right. And of course the boys were very into, they got into crime pretty early on. In the book, they would start doing breaking and entering, B&Es, when they were about 9. So it was a different, it was almost like, I guess, West Side Story in a way. Only instead of everybody being 30, they were 10, 9 and 10 years old. In fact, it really influenced me when I was doing When Two Women Die. I mean, the character of Ned is actually based on Rick, who's also based on a real person, who pulled my brother was adopted, and he pulled him into a life of crime very early on. So they were already robbing people's pockets and, you know, robbing families on the street at that age.
What was the good side of the
Oddly enough, I felt loved. The whole time I was being abused, I felt loved. I felt safe. I mean, I knew something was wrong, but when the person you trust is doing these things to you, you think, well, you know, it's wrong, but this is the person who's showing me what right and wrong is, so I don't know what it is. And I barely even knew what sex was. I mean, I don't like thinking that, you know, like where you go to the bathroom. I mean, when it first happened to me, and that, you know, it's in the book. I didn't understand what was going on. And I think the Stockholm Syndrome, now that we have a name for it, even a happy childhood in a way has got that effect going on where the parents and the family and even the neighborhood and school is creating a reality for children where they must learn how to survive. And not only survive, they have to do their homework and they have to excel. And that's really hard. And it's even harder for a kid who's not sure what reality is. And to this day, I just need to create my own reality because I just don't like waiting to find out what the thing is. I learn it and then I say, okay, those are the rules, I'm going to abide by them, and now I need to find some peace. But it is hard for children to figure out what reality is. And I think that's the whole thing of childhood, is finding out what it is and what you need to do and how you need to find your happiness. Figure out going to school and figure out what you're interested in. It's pretty stressful process for kids, I think.
Were you a bookworm as a young person?
Yeah,
Did you
absolutely.
love
That's
reading?
pretty much what happened.
Yeah.
Oh, everything in the book is almost 100% true, except where I had to diverge and create the murder. But the murder almost happened. I mean, what happens is one of the girls is molested on the street in Boston, and that really happened. And I started to run after him, and I was pulled back. But I had no weapon or anything. I mean, I probably would have just beat him with my fist and screamed and yelled. But the man was wearing a suit. And I remember it was the late 60s, and we were already hippies, and I was thinking, he's wearing a suit? He should know better. He should be better. I mean, these are the kinds of things that poor kids aspire to, wearing a suit to work. That was heavy. And, you know, so when you read the part about the murder, I mean, you can think that, thank goodness I didn't have a bow and arrow in my hand. Because, you know, I was just young enough to not truly understand the consequences of, you know, a crime of passion. But, you know, looking back, I could see how close the reality is to the book, even though it seems very bizarre. And it's the kind of story you hear on the news and you think, oh my God, that really happened, you know, that's so weird. But, you know, it did come close to happening. So, you know, yeah, I was a bookworm. So everything in here is pretty real.
And a true sense of beauty from the beginning with your art and with nature and
Thank
books.
you.
With all this violence, you get this aesthetic.
That's really what saved me, art. And, you know, when I learned how to read literature, I learned how to create art, and it was the beginning of, you know, before that it was nature and food and just being around the old Italians. But after I began to make my own art and reading, I could suddenly see how the things were made while I was reading it. And also, when you start to see different kinds of art and you realize what the artist has gone through, some of the people who were bold enough to break the rules, particularly when I was in high school with Mr. Doucette, we did the importance of being earnest, and I went to the library and found the rest of the stuff. And, you know, I really opened up. It was beautiful to see the picture of Dorian Gray, to read Salome, to find the drawings of Aubrey Beardsley. There's a whole section in here when she finds Aubrey Beardsley and opens it up.
But your love for color and the crayons when you went to
Oh,
kindergarten,
right.
you suddenly had your lots of crayons.
I know.
Yeah.
And the teacher liked my drawings, and no one, including me, I didn't know what she was talking about. She was going, look, look, and to my mother, and I thought they were awful. But it was exciting. And that did make it so that...
You knew there was this whole other world.
That's right. I knew there was another world. And when we came here, Joni and I, when we got our license, and we said, we'll just follow the ocean. My uncle had gone to Thailand and left me his car. So it was a convertible, so it was fun. And we said, we'll just follow the ocean north. Thank goodness we went north. And, well, I still remember going down Darling Street the first time and looking up and seeing a castle. And, you know, it was really there. And then we took a left turn, and I felt like I was coming home. I felt like I was driving up to my house. We've discovered everything here. It's beautiful.
Did you always know you wanted to be a writer, or?
I think when I started to really understand how things were written, I realized I could be. So maybe, I remember in the 8th grade, one of the teachers, she was hated, and that story's in there too. And when she left, I forced my mother to bake her a cake. And when she thanked me for the cake, she leaned over and she grabbed my hand and she said, Patricia, don't ever give up your writing. You're a good writer. I went, a writer? Wow. And I knew I really enjoyed answering the questions, you know. And I would write these long answers, and everybody was like, oh, they can't finish the test. And I said, Jack copied mine over because it was so messy. And that was, you know, I just loved it so much. I know, really. I loved it so much. It was just so much fun, you know.
Did you keep journals as a young?
Yeah, I did. They're really horrible.
Did
Yeah.
you burn them?
No, I didn't burn them. I published them.
What does your mother say about it all?
My mother is passed. And my parents are both passed. I have no knowledge of what anybody in the family. Are you talking about this book or the whole process?
thing.
Yeah. My mother is really proud of me for having published myself. She used to go to the stores and see these huge bins of books. You know, she would go to the discount stores like Building 19, and she would come home with all these novels, paperbacks, and she'd say, why not my daughter? What, all these books? Why not my daughter? And, you know, that was a good question because...
You still feel that way?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Yeah, because, well, now through Create Space in Arizona, we're actually, my husband is a writer too, and we're actually in Ingram's warehouse. The goal of getting into the warehouse, because every bookstore will ask you, are you with Ingram's? Mm-hmm. You know, and no matter how independent they think they are you with Ingram's? The one in Salem, are you in Ingram's? So, They Couldn't Spirit of 76 has a local author policy and window and so I'm in that store. But now I can be in any bookstore. But that is the key to what publishers can do for you. And, being in all the bookstores and getting some publicity. And of course, they create a machine. They create a publicity machine. If you're really someone they think they can push. They'll put you on TV and they'll just like bombard the public with that book in your face and the title and the cover and everything else. But that's definitely what they can do for you, but they only do that for a few people. First-time authors, they expect a lot from them. I've seen many authors who have had their second books turned down because they only sold 80,000 copies. And it's very hard. And they also go to readings in empty bookshops. So, yeah, it's pretty hard. They're all alone. Christina just told me a story about Augustine Burroughs walking around, wandering around the Brookline Booksmith on his own. And nobody was there to greet him and take care of him. And it was just typical, very typical story. But my mother was very proud. I remember she said, when I handed her, when she went and died, when I handed her Atlantis and Dreamwater, she said, "I'm proud of you," and she smoked a cigarette. "I'm proud of you." Like that. And I said, "I'm proud of you too." Because my sister broke her out in the hospital and she was able to die at home. That's just a joke term. She didn't break her out, but she brought her home to die at home. And she died on her own terms. She had lung cancer after 60 years of smoking, by the way. So I think she maybe died of old age. So, yeah, but it was the kind of life that, sometimes I wonder if I chose it. There's a philosophy that says you choose, your parents because you're already a soul, and it's worth it for the talent, for the art, and for all the beauty. It really, really was. Yeah. And for Marblehead.
Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful town.
Yep.
I'm raising my hand.
Yeah, okay, you do.
I want to say how much I admire you for your truth, for being a very difficult subject to write about, incest.
Yeah, thank you.
But, when you consider that 1 in 4 women, and I'm sure men too, they just are more concealing about it.
Yeah.
1 in 4 women have in some way been abused,
Right.
and a lot of it is sexual abuse, some physical, but a lot of it is both.
Right.
The courage to write your story, and you're in a novel, but it is your story.
Right.
I really admire that.
Thank you.
I think in some ways it's helpful to other people that are trying to heal.
That was my goal, really, to communicate the absolute truth about it, because I know that it talks also about the pleasure factor of abuse, and it really confuses victims. Because I really feel like I know the therapists mean well by telling the victim that it's about power and not sex. I feel like for the abuser it's very much about power, and sex is the weapon that they use. But for the victim it's very much about sex, because they must now take their first sexual experience into life. That defines sex for them. And they must take that into life and now make a normal life. And I think that is extremely confusing to them, because they're being told, no, it's not about sex. Well, that might make it easier for politically correct people to talk about the issue, but it really hurts the victim, I think. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to tell the truth about every part of it. Because and the other thing, too, is the neighborhood. You love where you came from. I don't care how much you hate it. It's a part of you. And if you can't really deny that, you have to deal with it. And I think that a lot of times you see people not wanting to learn English, or speaking, I know one particular case of a girl said she went home and she didn't know Spanish, and all her family wouldn't speak English while she was there, to punish her for not learning Spanish or knowing Spanish. And basically what they were saying is, this is who we are, this is our culture, and, you know, we're hanging on to it. You know, and it's a very, very powerful thing, and that the neighborhood that you come from is a very, very powerful thing, whether it's pleasant or not. So it's part of the reason why I needed to tell the truth, and also because I was taught that way. I learned from Hemingway, and the only place that, you know, the only thing that you did do was tell a true story well. And I couldn't think of anything, you know, any other reason to write than to do that.
If you go on to write another novel,
Mhm.
do you have any thoughts about where you might get your ideas? Will it still be about your own youth, or?
I do tend to write more real things that happen, and be inspired by things that happen. I've got another one that I wrote. I wrote a lot in the 90s, and I did have another one about Marblehead and some of the things that happened here. It's basically stuff, people I've known, and things that kind of build into a story.
It's a beautiful poem.
It sounds like it, yes, yeah.
And I have a small book of poetry coming out next about the seasons, and I've tried my hand at illustrating it. So very simple paintings, you know, more of a naive style.
Is it inspired by Marblehead itself?
Absolutely. The life that we led in, we had an apartment in an old Victorian on Humphrey Street in the area of Old Humphrey Farm. And it was very much still, you could feel the farm, the remnants of the farm. We were in the orchard area.
Is that where the high school is now?
No.
What's Humphrey Farm?
Humphrey Farm,
where it
it's funny because at the beginning when Marblehead was called Marblehead, it was going to be declared a town. There's a description of from the cliff to Humphrey Farm, which is in the Clifton area basically, and it goes back.
Almost like Swampscott.
Well, it is. You know, when you're going
Where it
towards
was.
Vinnon Square, there used to be that broad meadow, and then they built some houses on it. I wish Dad was here.
The square was all wildfire.
I know, I
found
remember
it
that.
as a little boy.
I
There was
remember.
nothing there.
Really?
But just recently,
My father would be well off in his hundreds.
they just built a house on that meadow, and that was our house was behind that.
Where
So
is that?
that was all
Where
open.
near Vinnon Square? Is it, how far is it near our house?
Yes, it is. It's right near your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just before you get
But
to your
the
house.
vibe was very
You could still, I mean, yeah, it was very
Really?
open. The next 3 yards were all people who were related, and their property was open, and there was wildlife. We had foxes and everything, bunnies and all kinds of things.
Is that a happy story, or?
You know, it's both.
Yeah.
It's not as intense as this one, but it was, it's, I don't know what you're doing. So, you know, it's a good story, but a lot of gardening is images and basically the seasons and what it feels like to really garden. It's, you know, I can't really reveal too much more without telling you the whole story, but it's poetry, and it's one long poem, and then there are some other poems in there too that kind of fit in with that I wrote there about nocturne being up all night, and insomnia. Beautiful summer nights, insomnia, I mean, it's just stunningly beautiful with the scent of the ocean and the roses and the mint and the lilies of the valley. It's very, very beautiful.
That's in your Marblehead Moon book, the very
Yes,
first book you ever
yeah.
did. Has a lot to do with the
Right, it definitely
Nice.
does.
beautiful.
So are you telling me there's a time issue? Is that what you're telling me back there?
I'm saying there's a lot of wine.
Oh. Stop talking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And we're going to please help ourselves with cookies, cheese, and wine. So, thank you.
How many children do you have?
Just right? Thank goodness.
She looks like her.
I know, thank you. Yeah. No, I just did it right the first time, and I'm gonna stick with that.
I have one too. Do you guys have one?
Yeah, it's fine.
We did well with one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way to
He
go.
does everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I gave Bruce
No
my
pressure.
grandson to sign it, right?